would have ever thought that Tim Burton's version of the pink elephants on parade would be less creepy than the original? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2019 Disney live-action remake, Dumbo. It stars Colin Farrell, Danny DeVito, Eva Green, and Michael Keaton, and was directed by Tim Burton. Dumbo is a live-action remake of the 1941 Disney animated classic of the same name, and tells the story of a large-eared baby circus elephant with a very unique talent. Unlike the original film, this version of Dumbo places much of its focus on human characters, like Holt Farrier, played by Colin Farrell, his two children, and the circus ringmaster Max Medici, played by Danny DeVito. The film expands upon the plot of the original film, continuing on to tell the story of what happened after the debut of Dumbo's infamous act at the end of the original movie. The original 1941 Dumbo has never been a favorite of mine. In fact, despite its status as a Disney classic, it remains one of my least favorite Disney feature-length animated films. So when I heard that Dumbo was joining the ranks of Disney's recent output of live-action remakes, I wasn't particularly excited. Then I found out that Tim Burton would be helming the film, and I was still equally as disinterested. Even in his prime, Burton was always pretty hit or miss for me, so his involvement with the project, while eyebrow-raising, wasn't enough to really get me on board. So we've got an original film I've never particularly cared for, a director whose output frequently annoys me, and then a trailer that kinda looked like a parody of a Tim Burton movie. In other words, this was really shaping up to be a good movie for me. But I love movies, and I love Disney, and I'm an extreme completionist when it comes to franchises, remakes, or really anything, so I knew I was going to be seeing it. And I honestly think my general apathy helped me a bit here, because I had fairly low expectations going in. I think one of the most difficult things about remakes, reboots, and sequels is the anticipation and the comparison to what came before. If you really love the original or the first film in a franchise, that sets a high bar and makes it easy to be dismissive of any changes or even attempts at similarities. The original Dumbo doesn't hold a special place in my heart, so even though I went in with low expectations, I felt freer because I wasn't bound by this love of the original. The Lion King in a few months? That's going to be an entirely different story. Dumbo is going to be divisive, separating lovers of the original film and people who are casual fans or who have never seen it. The most important thing to know before going in is that this is less of a remake and more of a reboot or reimagining of the story. The original movie was only 64 minutes long and had very little substance to its story, so this version really adds a lot to the narrative, extending the runtime by 45 minutes. In a way, this is a positive thing because it helps to bulk up the overly thin and simplistic plot of the original and explores what happened after the events of the first film. But in doing so, it entirely reframes the movie, shifting the focus from Dumbo himself. In the original film, Dumbo was the star. He and Timothy Mouse were the main characters, and other animals like the elephant matrons and the crows interacted with them as secondary characters. The humans were really nothing more than plot devices, serving as basic catalysts for some of the story beats. In the remake, that gets flipped around. Now the animals have been relegated to the background, with only Dumbo occasionally coming to the forefront. But his story is really no longer his own. It serves as the narrative device to tell the story of the human characters, who didn't even exist in the original. The plot is certainly more fleshed out in this version, but I really wish it had gone in a different direction and focused on the animals more. Oh, and if you're a fan of Timothy Q. Mouse, you are going to be sorely disappointed. Despite the extensive changes and expansions to the story, there were a number of moments that served as callbacks to the original. I think my favorite thing that falls into this category was Casey Jr. We get a few brief moments of his awesome song in the score of this one, and a character actually sings a snippet of the lyrics to himself at one point. Although the opening sequence is very different, they do integrate a stork into a particular scene, which was a nice touch. Silhouettes are seen quite a few times, subtly alluding to some moments in the original. Dumbo's naming gets a nice twist, and although the crows are nowhere to be seen, which is probably for the best, the feather plays a more significant role this time around. I think people will be disappointed with the iconic musical numbers here. Baby Mine, which is used very heartbreakingly in the original, almost feels like a throwaway sequence here. One of the most popular songs in the original isn't even in this version at all, aside from a few spoken lines, and the pink elephant sequence was significantly altered. Now obviously nowadays we aren't going to see a baby elephant get drunk in a PG movie. There's a nice little reference to that here, though, that really landed with the crowd. Unfortunately, I just didn't really like the way they integrated the sequence here, and the altered song just didn't have the same impact on me that the original always does. Everything about it was very Tim Burton-esque, so if you like his style, you'll probably like that moment. Speaking of Burton-esque stylings, there is no confusing this movie for anybody else's work. Love him or hate him, Tim Burton always makes very visually unique films, with eccentric characters. All of the Burton staples are there. The outcast character, the strong-willed female character, the gleaming steampunk aesthetic, the hyper-stylized horror elements, and the extremely flamboyant villain. As far as the acting goes, I wasn't all that impressed here. Danny DeVito did a good job in his role as Medici, but most of the other leads were just alright. I was not a fan of Keaton here, his character or the odd, extremely over-the-top way he played him. I have to say, I was also not impressed with Nico Parker's performance as Millie Ferrier. For a kid seeing a flying elephant for the first time, she couldn't have been more unsurprised or apathetic. Part of it was definitely the writing, but I just don't think she was the right fit here. Although it's very in line with Burton's usual style, the visual aesthetic was a bit of a miss for me. Everything is hyper-saturated and overly polished looking. It all feels so artificial, but surprisingly, Dumbo doesn't. Dumbo is really this film's saving grace. His CGI is great, with the exception of a couple early riding scenes, and he is just so utterly adorable. Dumbo's cute in the original movie, but this film just ups the cuteness factor 100-fold. His big blue eyes, the giant ears, the little squeaks and sounds he makes, with the clown makeup, wearing hats, with nothing at all, he is absolutely adorable. I didn't think that that was going to be something that affected me, since it didn't in the original, but holy crap. Unfortunately, the amazingly cute Dumbo is pushed to the narrative background most of the time, and we're left with a surprisingly muddled and inconsistent movie. Hints of the original story are there, but the themes of overcoming adversity and mother-child bonds are just barely touched upon, instead being forced behind a surprisingly ironic corporate greed storyline and a ham-fisted attempt at animal advocacy themes. Those thematic alterations do make this a much more uplifting story than the original. Gone is the unrelenting sadness and mean-spirited tone, instead replaced by a mediocre, but at times, heartwarming story. Alright, so let's talk about the pros and cons. By far, the biggest pro is Dumbo himself. He's almost overwhelmingly cute, but it feels organic and never like it's a distraction or stylistically over the top. I wasn't particularly moved by his cuteness in the original film, but here it's definitely the movie's most positive aspect. The second pro is the story expansion. I wasn't too pleased with the way in which they did it, or the strange thematic directions in the plot, but I'm glad that it had a typical narrative structure. The thin plot of the original film was one of its weakest aspects, so the addition of a true plot was a welcome and necessary addition to this nearly 2-hour-long film. I don't mind that the plot deviated fairly quickly into sequel territory, but I really think there were better stories to be told than the one we were given. On the con side, my number one issue was the redirected focus of the film. When I go to see Dumbo, I want to see an animal story, not a human one. I understand that the human focus made it easier to expand the story to something with more substance, but I really would have preferred a more animal-centric film. Even if they still didn't talk, putting the animals front and center in the story would have felt more in line with what Dumbo's all about. Including some of the other animal characters would have been nice too. I mean, I never liked the matron elephants, but what they did with Timothy Q. Mouse here is a travesty. The second con is the style. I know that's a bit broad, but it just didn't feel right for Dumbo. We know that Tim Burton can do some stylistic and eccentric circus scenes, but the tone just felt inconsistent with Dumbo. The visual aesthetic is out of sync with the core themes, as is the pacing of the film too. Some moments and plot points are breezed over, while other scenes seem to go on far longer than they should. Then you've got the eccentric characters and iffy acting, further pulling the focus away from Dumbo. Altogether, it just didn't feel like the right fit for this movie. The third con is the mishandling of the iconic moments. Story alterations obviously necessitated a number of changes here, and some of the smaller aspects got nice nods in this film, but nearly all of the iconic moments were tweaked just a little too much, or were missing altogether. The baby mime scene, for instance, was incredibly short, and didn't pack nearly enough of an emotional punch. Likewise, the pink elephants on parade sequence was an underwhelming experience when compared to the original film. I didn't expect or want a shot-for-shot remake, but there should have been a bit more balance between making stylistic changes and retaining the emotional core of the original's most iconic scenes. I'm gonna give Dumbo 2.5 out of 5 paws. Even with my very low expectations and lack of a meaningful connection with the original film, I was left a bit underwhelmed here. It's not horrible, but it's also not good either. It kind of just is. I would recommend Dumbo to fans of the previous Disney live-action remakes. This strays away from the shot-for-shot style that we've seen before in some of the others, but still has enough of the original content there to be superficially satisfying. I would be hesitant to recommend this to fans of the original movie, though. There are just so many omissions and changes that I think it will be more of a disappointment than anything else. If you only vaguely remember Dumbo from your childhood, or you've never seen it before, then I think you'll have at least a better shot at liking this one. If you liked Dumbo, I've obviously got to recommend the original animated version first and foremost. It's much more simplistic in terms of its style and story, but the animal-centric aspect is worthwhile. Just make sure you don't go in expecting an upbeat movie. I would also recommend Big Fish. It's one of my favorite Tim Burton movies and deals with a circus setting and eccentric characters in a much better and more creative way. Alright, a few questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen the Dumbo remake? If so, what'd you think of it? I'm especially curious to know your level of connection with the original movie and how that influences your opinion here. And number 2, would you prefer that future Disney live-action remakes stick closer to the original plot, or do you like the idea of reimagined versions of these stories? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it so you can see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.